Hey everyone, and welcome to our May live event for National Sewing Circle. Once again, we have Nicki LaFoille back to answer all of your sewing questions. So thanks for being here, Nicki.
I'm glad to be here.
Of course. So this is your first time tuning into a live event with National Sewing Circle. You have about an hour to ask any sewing question or sewing related question you have to Nicki, whether that is something you're maybe struggling with on a current project, maybe you've never done any kind of project before and you're looking for inspiration. So sort of any question goes. So if you want to ask a sewing question to Nicki, go ahead and insert that into the chat box. That's probably either below the video, above the video, somewhere on the screen where you're watching us right now. And we'll go ahead and answer those as many as we get, as much as we have time for. So first off, I want to talk about whatever sewing project you're working on. I know sometimes we always talk about whatever projects we're working on that maybe go with, if it's winter, we're doing a Christmas project. If it's spring, something spring related, but we're kind of in between holidays, in between things. So what is it you're working on?
Well, spring is a super busy time for me. Doing things outdoors, garden and stuff. So I haven't had a ton of time for sewing. But I did a Facebook Live actually for National Sewing Circle a couple weeks ago, and I made a little earbud pouch. And
Yeah.
that was such a fun project for me that after the video, I made a couple more because our neighbors, they have two girls, early teenagers. So I had to make sure to have matching ones for them because you
Perfect.
can't give one sister like a different color because then there's going to be fighting over
Right.
what
Of
color.
course. Yeah.
So they needed to be matching. But that was a really fun, quick project. But otherwise, I haven't had time to actually do any projects, but I've been thinking about them, and coming up with, my next projects and starting to draft out patterns for things because I just got gifted some awesome flannel fabric. So I want to do something with that. I'm just not entirely sure what yet.
That's perfect. Even the thought of sewing with flannel right now in Texas is making me sweat. So it's like I am months away from working with flannel, but I am excited to see whatever it is that you're sewing with. But right before we went live, we were talking about you doing some gardening, and I always have these like fun ideas of being a gardener or like having chickens and doing all that kind of stuff, and I don't. But I've seen a lot of pictures where people make sort of gardening aprons, or if you are someone who has chickens and you're collecting eggs, you're making, an egg gathering apron, those kind of projects. So if you were going to make something for outdoors as opposed to the kitchen, how would you change up your fabric? What would you need to change up in terms of supplies, and how would you make that?
So an outdoor apron, that's a great idea for gathering eggs. So you don't have to bring a basket with you or something. And when I'm pulling vegetables out of the garden, for some things it's good to have a basket for like leafy greens and stuff, but for carrots or, beets or, bigger bulb type things, just shoving them into the pocket of an apron would be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it depends on, what you're growing in your climate and everything. My first thought would be to just make sure you have a lot of pockets and make sure your fabric is super washable. So, just like a cotton that you can shake the excess dirt out and then throw it in the wash if you ever decide to wash it. It's not totally necessary. But you could also play around with like laminated cotton so that the dirt could just wipe off instead of getting ground into the fabric. But otherwise, just a loop around the neck and, a tie around the back. I've seen some aprons where you take the bottom corners and like button them up to make your pocket.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting, but I think I would probably like to have my pockets just like sewn on, but I would do just a ton of pockets probably all along the bottom of the apron. So
Yeah.
that's a really good idea for a spring project though, actually.
Perfect. See, I'm just giving you more projects that that you'll need to find time to make. But speaking of easy projects, you mentioned the laminated cotton or oilcloth. So on the there's a banner on the page that you're watching this video on, and it is for our free sewing patterns. So we have a whole page dedicated to a bunch of free sewing patterns. I know a couple of those are like easy pouches and things where we have done those with oilcloths and laminated cotton. So if you are, getting that fabric and you have some left over, some super fun, easy projects you can make with those. Our next questions that are coming in here, Jenna asks, what is the best way to take in a dress in the waist without having to undo the whole length of the dress, or is this possible?
Yeah, so without having to undo like the whole side seam, maybe. So if you're just wanting to pinch in a little bit on the waist, it depends a little bit on what other type of design details are on the dress. If it's a waistband or if it's just a seam at the waist, horizontally across the body. But to take things in at the waist, um, 90% of the time, it's fairly easy to do to just start sewing kind of up above where you need to take in and stitch. You go from that seam in as much as you need and then taper it back out. Just taper it right back out to 0. And you want to make it kind of a gentle curve so you're not, pinching it in and then you'll create like tucks kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a look too. You can kind of create a tuck. But if you just want to curve it in, to like bow that side seam in a little bit, you want to do a gentle curve. So however much you need at the waist, if you need to take out like a 1/2 inch on either side, you'd want to start at 0, start right at the side seam where the stitching already is, and then just kind of gently go in to that 1/2 inch mark and then gently bow it back out.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if there's bulk there from what you have taken out, you can clip that out to reduce the bulk. But a lot of times that's really all you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to see, we don't actually have a video on how to do this with a dress specifically, but one of our other instructors, Aurora, did the same idea with a shirt, sort of a button-down blouse kind of shirt, and she actually put it on inside out and shows the same technique, how you can, pinch it out, pin it. And so a great way if you need to do it to yourself, if it's the dress that you need to wear and you don't have someone to help you out, a great tutorial on that on National Sewing Circle. Cheryl wants to know if we have a picnic basket pattern, and I know we don't have a specific one for a picnic basket. However, we do have ones for fabric baskets, simple 4-sided fabric baskets. But Nicki, if you were going to make a fabric picnic basket, how would you do it?
So yeah, a fabric basket, I actually have one right here because I have all my supplies in there. I have a couple of them, but I made these little baskets, which are kind of like picnic basket-y, but obviously very small. So to make them bigger, you could just scale this type of thing up. And the bigger it gets, you're going to probably want to use some stabilizer in it, some fairly stiff stabilizer, or even a couple of layers of stabilizer to make sure it, the sides stay sturdy. And you could, you could throw a little lid on probably. If you had, another like flap come out of here, then you could, tie it, make a little tie. But these were just very small, a small pattern that I boxed the corners essentially. So you can scale that up and box your corners. This is a fairly large box. So my corner seam is like almost 4 inches to box that. So a fairly big box to your corners, and just make it as to the dimensions that you would like. A picnic basket is fairly squarish or rectangular, but not a lot you can do to it to personalize it, but it would make a good picnic basket.
Perfect. And so for reference, for the videos we have on National Sewing Circle, because I'm going to say this a million times during this live event, we have several. So we have a couple on, like I mentioned, making baskets similar to that. Only I did one out of 5 equally sized squares. So you have 4 for the sides and 1 for the bottom. And then we also have another video on there that kind of goes along with this, but it's actually one that Ellen March did for us on it's for purse handles, but it's a bunch of different handle options that if you wanted to add some sort of handle or a couple handles on both sides of your basket to make it easier to carry, you can do that as well. And then we have a video on 2 different ways to box corners. So if you are not familiar with that technique, I show 2 different ways you can do it. So between Nicki's inspiration and all those videos, you can definitely create an awesome basket. All right, Hannah asks, I'm having such trouble with sleeves. Mine are always tight or rippled at the top. I can't understand them, so I just stick to sleeveless.
Sleeves can be pretty tricky. So what I have learned about sleeves is, so if you're having trouble with a commercial pattern, so set in sleeves for a commercial top, like a woven like this one, a lot of times on commercial patterns, they just add way too much ease into the sleeve cap. So you have too much fabric here that you're trying to ease into your armscye, and you either get a bunch of tucks that you've got to undo and redo, or ripples like you're saying, or it ends up looking like a puff, like a big puff sleeve, because you've got all that fabric there. So what I do is, before you even cut out the fabric or anything, you can measure the sleeve cap length and measure that against the armscye length. And you do want like a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of ease. So your sleeve cap length will be 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch longer than your armscye seam length. But a lot of times commercial patterns will have 1 to 2 inches of ease, and it's not necessary to have that much. All you need is a little bit to ease that in, to have room for your shoulder. You know, that's why that sleeve cap length is larger than the armscye, because you've got to have this fabric curving around this bone of your shoulder. So to take out some of that ease out of the sleeve cap, you can slash it in a couple of places. I think I have a video on this, or maybe Jill Case had a video on this on nationalsewingcircle.com, and she did it a little bit different than I did, but I liked to slash my sleeve pattern just below the bicep line, which is, or just below where the armscye seam will begin, and then slash right down the center, and you can swivel the cap. So try to do it with my hands here. And then this is what the shape of the sleeve cap kind of looks like. You can swivel that in to just take out some of that ease, and it'll drop your sleeve cap length, or height rather, a little bit, but that's fine. And it'll take out some of that length from that seam, and then you can just, true that up to make sure it's still a smooth line, and that will remove some of that extra ease, that extra fabric from the sleeve, so it's easier to put in. You won't get ripples and tucks, and you won't get that weird like puffy cap sleeve look. And it'll just lie flatter and nicer while still having enough room for your shoulder in there. So that is something I've learned about commercial patterns, but also it depends on the fabric that you're using too. So like if you're sewing a knit fabric, you don't need any ease in the sleeve cap, because that fabric is going to stretch anyway. So you're going to be able to match the seam lines exactly, so they can be the exact same length, the sleeve cap and the armscye. And you can just stitch those together 1-to-1, and that knit fabric is going to stretch over your shoulder anyway. So you don't need to build in any extra room for your shoulder in there, because the knit will stretch around it. So it's actually fairly easy to put a set-in sleeve in with a knit, because it just eases together really well, because the fabric will give. And for sleeves too, what I like to do, instead of setting it in the round, so in the round meaning you stitch the side seams and you stitch the sleeve underarm seam, and then you stitch the sleeve cap into the armscye. So it's it's a circle, it's a hole that you're stitching that sleeve cap in. That can get kind of tricky sometimes, especially with smaller sizes, to see what's going on in there and to, finagle it around. So what I like to do is to do my sleeve in the flat. So I leave my side seams unstitched. I just stitch my shoulder seams, and then I insert the sleeve cap in. And then you can stitch the whole thing from the sleeve, pivot at the underarm, and stitch the side seam all in one. So it kind of combines steps, and it also, for me at least, makes it a lot easier to see what's going on in my arm's eye and my sleeve cap, to make sure I'm not getting tucks and ripples and stuff. So hopefully some of those tips will help.
Perfect. And so since Hannah were already sort of avoiding some patterns because you were sticking to sleeveless, you could also consider just looking for different types of sleeves, because I happen to know that regular sleeves are not your favorite, Nicki. So if you want to tell us a little bit about the different, more common couple types of sleeves that there are.
Yeah, so I love raglan sleeves. And those are super easy. So the raglan sleeve, sometimes called a baseball sleeve or baseball tops, because I don't know,
they look like
baseball uniforms, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's the seam that has the seam here. So the sleeve actually comes into your neckline, and then you bind the neckline or however you want to finish it. But it's a lot easier because you're not trying to really ease anything in. It's just, you have a straight seam here and one on the back, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really an easy one to do and really attractive. I just like that look. So yeah, that's definitely another style to try.
Yeah, and I do believe you've done a pattern for us with a top like that as well. So perfect. All right, Jan asks, I need new scissors, or do you recommend a rotary cutter for cutting out patterns?
I do recommend a rotary cutter. Rotary cutter is super nice for cutting out patterns. Although I don't have them right here with me, but I have a pair of Ginger scissors. Boom, they're beautiful,
I know.
and they're like
with the case, super sharp, at the best.
Yes, so sharp. I love the sound they make when they go.
Right, they do. Like you can just tell.
Oh, you can tell they're sharp. Yep. Yeah. So I do love those scissors, and those are great. They have a place. But when cutting out patterns, and especially garment patterns, I do love a rotary cutter because they get around those curves so nicely and seamlessly. Cutting out curves with scissors can sometimes, skew you a little bit. And because when you cut, you get the bottom blade of the scissors under the fabric, there's always the chance of shifting that pattern on the fabric and, getting things skewed a little bit. But the rotary cutter, you don't have, that fabric doesn't lift up at all. You're just, pizza slicing it, pizza cutting it around those curves. So everything is just, it's staying nice and flat, and you can get around the curves. And rotary cutters, they come in, or they have available different types or sizes of blades as well. So if you're cutting out super narrow curves ever, you can get some of the smaller blades. Mine, I always just have the, I think 45 millimeter blade, which is the fairly standard size. And I cut out my, my arm's eyes and necklines and any of the curves that I need to cut. But it's just, it seems to get a nicer, smooth curve with a rotary cutter. So yeah, I do recommend having a rotary cutter for that purpose.
Yeah. Well, so obviously if you get a rotary cutter, and this is the 45 millimeter size, the one that you were talking about, if you get the cutter as well, you're going to also need a mat, right, or something to protect your surface. So, I can tell my Karen, I have my mat always on my table here because I use it a lot for quilting. But for me, and maybe you can address this as well, you and I definitely cut out different sizes of patterns. You're on the extra small size, and I am not. So for me, my pattern pieces are generally bigger than my actual cutting mat. So how do you do the, I've cut maybe half of it and now I need to shift it so I can continue cutting it out, because you do need to have that mat under it, obviously, anywhere you're using your rotary cutter.
Yes. So there are a couple of main things to think about. If you've got your mat on your table, and you've got your fabric and everything on a table, you've got this, yards and yards of fabric, however much, you need for this garment. The main thing that I want to stress is to make sure the excess of that fabric is not hanging off the table, because the weight of that fabric hanging off is going to pull on everything else that's on the table. So if you have a knit, it's especially disastrous, because then it's going to stretch, what you've got under your pattern. But even with a woven, it's probably going to either skew the grain or it's just bad news. So try and roll that up and keep that on the table so it's not pulling or shifting anything. But as far as, so if you've got a big pattern, and even for me, if I'm doing a dress and I've got one long piece, I have to do this, and it's kind of like shifting your cutting mat under your fabric. And I guess it's probably a good thing that I actually don't have a table, because I'm just doing everything on the floor, and it makes it a lot easier for me in this case, because I can just kind of shift my cutting mat under the fabric, and I've got my pattern and my pattern weight set on top of it, and I can just glide that mat underneath where I need to cut. But if it's on a table, you might need to do a little bit of extra shifting, to shift that mat around, or shift the fabric over the mat. If you don't have room to move your mat around under the fabric, you might have to move the fabric over the mat. And then also make sure all of that extra fabric isn't falling off the table. So it takes a little bit of shifting. And if you have a big pattern piece like that and you have to do that, generally I recommend pattern weights, but shifting the fabric, sometimes you need a little bit extra hold. So in that case, you'd want to use pins, and a lot of them, to keep that pattern adhered to that fabric, so that as you're shifting it around to cut it, the pattern doesn't shift off of the fabric in a way that you don't want. So a couple things to watch out for.
Absolutely. All right, so back to our earlier conversation when we were talking about gardening at the very beginning here, but Deb says she loves the garden apron idea, and she always sews knee patches into her garden pants since they get so worn.
That is a really good idea.
Yeah. Yep. All right, Joan asks, when should I be using my walking foot? My girlfriend and I were debating if we should use it with stretchy fabric or not.
Yeah, so the walking foot is super cool and super useful for a lot more than people generally think about. So a walking foot, initially I always thought it was just for quilting, for keeping all those lofty layers together, but it can be used in a lot of different, with different fabrics too. And with stretchy fabric is one of the good ones that you might want to use it for, because the purpose of a walking foot is to feed the upper layer of fabric along at the same rate as the feed dogs on the bed of your machine are pulling the lower layer of fabric. So knit fabric, a lot of times you'll find that upper layer, because of the stretchiness of the fabric, it kind of shifts. So when you get to the bottom of your seam, you might have, the fabric doesn't match at the bottom of your seam. And that's because one layer has shifted, or one layer has gotten pulled at a different rate than the other layer. So the walking foot is a really great thing to combat that, because it works in conjunction with the feed dogs down here, and it's pulling the fabric at the same rate, so you don't get that creeping. So it's great for knits. It's great for other fabrics that might, be slick, like satin. The shiny layer of satin with another shiny layer of satin, it just does not want to stay together. So you can use a ton of pins. You can baste on either side of the seam, or you can use a walking foot. And I have a Hough Passport 2.0, And I love this machine because it has the integrated dual feed foot, which is essentially a built-in walking foot. It's this little black thing at the back of the presser foot that hooks in, and it's essentially a walking foot. It just kind of feeds that upper layer of fabric along. And I can only have it engaged with my normal foot. I can't engage it with like a zipper foot or anything, which is a little bit of a bummer because I would always have it engaged otherwise. Anytime I've got my regular foot on, I've got that walking foot engaged, even if it's with cotton fabric. It's easy to engage it, and it helps keep those layers from shifting. And even things that have like a pile or a pill to it, like sometimes flannel has that a little bit of loft on the right side. Even that little bit of loft can encourage shifting, and so a walking foot just helps keep the layers together. So yes, if you have a walking foot, I highly recommend throwing it on. And the contraption looks kind of intimidating if you've never used like a actual walking foot attachment before, but it's really easy to use. You can look up some videos, and once you know how to use it, it's just really easy to pop it on, and just super worth it, in my opinion.
Absolutely. All right. Our next question here. My large spool cap is not tight anymore. How can I tighten it so it won't fall off, or do I need to buy a new one?
That is not something that I had ever thought about before. So if your spool cap is loose, it may have gotten, I don't know, cracked somehow, or if it was exposed to heat. Like my attic sewing room gets really hot. I don't know if that would be enough to do it, but if it got warped a little bit, I'm not sure if that's something that you could fix. If it's loose,
I'm like thinking of MacGyvering ways here in my
I know,
head to
like
either like put something in there to fill up
like
some extra space or wrap. But I was going to ask you, so on my machine, I just looked to see I can go at either horizontal or vertical. And obviously if I'm going vertical, I don't necessarily need my thread spool cap as tight as you just had yours coming off horizontal. Can you raise yours?
I can. Yep.
So that's always an option too. If you can't keep it on horizontally anymore because it's not tight enough, go ahead and just go up with
Flip
it.
it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if yours doesn't flip up, yours might have a hole for an extra spool, um, like mine does, so you could have it vertically that way as well. But you could maybe like wrap some tape around the pin, and
Yep.
that might
And
make
bigger.
it just a little bit bigger so that it would fit a little bit tighter. But I can't imagine these are too expensive. You would just, if you decided you wanted to buy a new one, you would just want to make sure it would fit your specific brand and model of machine.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Phyllis asks, I have a new embroidery machine, which I'm learning to use. I was trying to do a monogram and had it set up and started. Unfortunately, every time I get to a certain part of the first letter where it sews over itself, some of it jams up the machine, and she's broken 3 needles trying to complete this.
So sometimes if you get so much thread laid down in one area of the design, it can become, they call them bulletproof designs because they get so thick that just nothing can pierce them. So that might be a flaw of the design, because a lot of times designs will come in different sizes, and the manufacturers will do it in a way that, okay, here's the original design, and to make it smaller, we just scale it down. But that just compresses the amount of stitches into a smaller area, where they should have taken out some of those underlying stitches in order to make it smaller, but they don't always do that. So I would say try a different design to start with, see if that helps. You want to also just make sure you're using the right type of stabilizer with your fabric, because if your stabilizer is too thick, that might also play into some of the issues you're having. So you want to match your stabilizer weight to your fabric weight. So if you're embroidering on just like a quilting cotton weight fabric, you'll probably be able to use a tearaway stabilizer, which is fairly lightweight. Stabilizers come in cutaway, which is the thicker, stiffer type, tearaway, which is still like a cloth type, but it's fairly lightweight. Water soluble, which comes in a cloth type and a film type, which is very, very thin. And then the heat removable film, which is very lightweight as well. So you want to match your stabilizer weight to your fabric weight. And yeah, just make sure you're using a new embroidery thread as well. Like rayon is a nice thin embroidery thread, so that can help reduce some of the bulk as well, using a nice fine thread. So some things to try. Hopefully one of those will make sure you don't break any more needles, because I'm sure that's frustrating.
Yes, absolutely. All right, our next question. When making a bias binding for a neckline using a woven fabric, when I need to cut it a little shorter so that it will need to be stretched a bit so that it lays flat against the body.
Yes. So when you are binding your neckline, you do want the binding to be a little bit smaller than the neckline that you're binding, for that exact reason. Because if it was the same size, it would like stick straight up.
Right.
So because it's bias, it has enough of ease and give to it that you can ease it into different sized holes. So yes, I normally do my binding like 90% of my neckline length. And yeah, you just want to ease it in equally. So, you quarter mark the binding and you quarter mark the neckline, so that it distributes that evenly around the entire neckline. And when you sew it in, it might look like it's got some ripples, but give it a press and you'll be golden.
And you do have a video for us on National Sewing Circle, but it's not using a woven. I believe you did it with a knit fabric, but it's the same sort of idea. And you do talk about cutting it a little shorter and actually showing how to do it and showing the quarter marking technique. So we do have that video available as well. All right, what are a couple tips for creating garments without a pattern? Connie says, I sometimes will just trace a shirt I already have, but I could use some tips to make them more flattering.
Yeah. So I have a video on this as well. It was just a tank top. It was a knit tank top that I traced off, but you can use that technique for t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, pants. And it's that technique that you're talking about of, you fold it in half and kind of trace it off, making sure you add in your seam allowances. So that is one way to do it. It's fairly quick and easy, and it's a good way to copy a style of something that you already have in your closet, fits you, you like the style and the design details. But apart from that, making garments without a pattern, so you can do it in a way like starting from the very basics, like a rectangle for a skirt. All you need is these straight lines, these very basic block shapes, and then you need to add in some shaping. So that basic block shape for a skirt, you add some elastic at the top. Just make sure you have enough fabric to go around your hips and the widest part of your lower half, and that's a garment right there. But in order to make things, flattering, that also kind of depends on your style and what you see as flattering. But I'm a big proponent of having a basic pattern called a sloper. So just like the basic block of a bodice pattern. And all you need is one pattern. And then you can create your own design details off of that basic pattern just using a couple of, simple simple techniques. Like you can slash that pattern anywhere to create a seam line. Just cut the pattern, add seam allowances, and then you can color block. You can make, a yoke. As long as you have that basic sloper pattern that fits you, you can cut it down the center and add some for a button placket. There's a ton of different things that you can do off of one pattern. And even if you just trace that pattern of your t-shirt, you can change the neckline. You can make it a crew neck. You can make it scoop lower. You can turn it into a V-neck. There are just a lot of fun, cool details that you can do off of any pattern. It's just whatever style you like and whatever, design details are attractive to you. So it's sky's the limit.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like when you find that one pattern that like fits you perfectly and then you just want to keep using that one, but then you can, change them up so they at least all look a little different. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What is the best way to work with outdoor style fabrics that are a bit slippery? Currently, I'm just making square placemats with duck canvas on the bottom, but the material is a little tricky to work with.
So working with fabrics that are a bit slippery. So, as I was talking about earlier, the walking foot is great just to keep your layers together. So sometimes those outdoor style fabrics too, if they're really thick canvas, might be hard to pin through. But you want to keep your layers together. So you might need to use some clips. Like I happen to have one of these here. This isn't even like a sewing style clip. This is like a chip clip that I've been using. But they do make, I think they're called Wonder Clips, specifically for sewing. And they're great because the bottom, they're flat in some way that allows them to just slide right over your machine bed. Whereas this one kind of gets caught as it's coming up, which you have to watch out for. But those Wonder Clips can be nice for keeping slippery fabrics together. I would say make sure you have a needle that is appropriate for the fabric. So those outdoor fabrics can sometimes be thicker or more tightly woven and may require a needle that has a little bit more girth to it. So either like a leather needle is great because it's got a really sharp chisel tip for like chiseling through thick, dense layers, or just a higher size of your all-purpose needle. So you go from size 65/9, which is really, really fine. You can go up to size, 90/14 is a general medium weight, and they go up to 110, even maybe higher than that. I'm not sure. But a good sturdy needle to help you go through all of those layers. It kind of depends on what issues you're having with that outdoor fabric, but hopefully some of those ideas will help make it a little bit easier to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Eileen asks how to convert crew neck t-shirts to V-neck, or should I start over?
You can convert.
Yes,
I love
absolutely.
this.
At least going in that direction. It's easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go on a pattern. It's super easy. So I'm going to talk about pattern and altering something that's ready made. So on your pattern, if you have that high crew neck, all you need to do is, gosh, I think I have something. Okay, here we go. Here's a t-shirt front. So if your neckline, your crew neck is up here and you want to make it into a V, choose where along the center front you want, how deep you want that V to go, and really just draw yourself a straight line. going down from your shoulder point. So going down from your shoulder point, and then you can cut that off, and you have a V-neck. But if you have a crew neck t-shirt, ready-made t-shirt, you can still turn that into a V-neck. You'll want to take off if you've got ribbing around the neck, which if it's a ready-made t-shirt, it probably does. Take that off, and then kind of like the same idea as this, fold it in half with the center front, at the center, and decide how deep you want that V. If you want to reuse the ribbing, you might not want to go down too far, because then the ribbing, you just won't have enough ribbing to get there and it'll kind of pucker. But if you just want to bring it down a little bit into a V, you can reuse that ribbing and reattach it along your new neckline. Or if you want to have a deeper V, go ahead and cut your deeper V and just use a different fabric to create a new, either ribbing, or you can use just regular knit fabric to make kind of a band. If it's not like ribbing, I wouldn't call it ribbing, but it's a band essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's kind of the same idea as attaching that binding we were talking about earlier, but then you would pinch it down in the center to make it be a V.
That's what I was just going to ask. You stole my next follow-up question, because since I am wearing, a V-neck t-shirt here, same thing. So you wouldn't really be able to put it on the same way. I was just going to ask you how you would, because mine, it's going to be hard to see, but it comes together and then there's a seam right here in the middle of the ribbing. So how exactly is that done?
Yes. So you could do it in essentially the same way, quarter mark it, attach it. When you get down to the point of the V, you would stop with the needle right at that point and then like swivel it and attach the rest, and then go in after the fact and create your little seam in the center. I have also seen it done where you leave your band, you don't stitch it into a circle, you leave it as one long length and start here and attach it around, and then attach it at the center. Yeah. So it's just kind of a different way to go about getting the same thing.
Yeah. I'm feeling to see if there's any other seams on mine. So no, they did that method. There's no other seams, so it's all the way continuous and then seamed here in the middle. So awesome. Good different ways you can do it. All right. Ellie asks, what is the best method of taking in 2 inches at the waist on men's jeans?
So taking in 2 inches. So if you want to take in 2 inches from the circumference, you can, that's not too much. So you could still just pinch it out of the sides. Mm-hmm. And even though on jeans, you're not really going to have a side seam in the band. You'll kind of make a side seam when you pinch out a little bit, but I think
you just hide it under a belt loop is usually, I'll take a belt loop off and hide it under there.
Yeah. That's a good idea. But for 2 inches, you would just pinch out, so it would be, a half inch, because you're taking it from each side. So you're taking an inch out of each side, because when you're taking things in, you want to make sure you take it in, evenly around the garment. So you'd be pinching out, it would be an inch, but when you're sewing it, it looks like you're doing a half inch seam allowance because you're folding it out. So half inch on each side, and you can cut it away from the wrong side if it's too bulky. But yeah, just the same kind of thing, just pinching it out and then tapering that back down into the actual seam. So tapering it down to 0. So you don't have like a tuck underneath the waistband. You got to true it back out to the original seam.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Kenna asks, where do you get underwire for a swimsuit or bra? Joanne's didn't have any, or do I even need underwire for projects like these?
That's a good question. I have never looked for underwire because I've never tried to make something that would require it.
Yeah.
But I was looking into making swimsuits the other day because we talked about it briefly, I don't know, months ago, and I was like, I need to do that. So I was
Mhm.
looking it up. Maybe that'll be a project for the summer. Put it on
Mhm.
my list. But all the patterns that I looked at for swimsuits didn't need underwire, and maybe it's just the styles that I was looking at didn't need underwire, but um, there are styles that don't require it, so you could start there. But I'm sure you can get underwire online too,
I'm sure. Or just thinking to what I know that my local Joann's carries, which is boning for like, making dresses and stuff. Could you potentially substitute, because boning is essentially a hardened plastic covered in fabric that you can sew it into. You could, substitute that. It's got the same sort of stability, sort of, as
Mhm.
underwire. Might even be more comfortable. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Because I know I've never worked with boning either, but I know they do that for like corsets and
Yeah.
stuff to keep shape. I don't
Yep.
know if it would like underwire. The wire is molded in that shape, and boning I feel like is just straight
But
though.
it's flexible, so as long as you sewed in essentially, if you want it to curve, you sew in a little, what is a waistband, like a
Like a
casing.
casing, yeah.
Yeah, and then you put it in there, and then it can't go anywhere. It stays whatever
Right,
shape you sew it into, and they come in like different thicknesses of the amount of fabric wrapped around them too. So there's some of them have very little fabric, and they're just meant to like slide into a casing, and
right.
some have about a half inch of fabric on both sides, and you stitch that into wherever you want it to go. So
Okay.
you can make it. I don't know how tight of a curve you can go, but you can definitely do like a bra shape.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting. Yeah, that's an idea.
fun idea. All right. Our next one, speaking more about bras, when making a tank top with a built-in sports bra, where should I connect the two?
So, those those tank tops with like the shelf bra are great, and I love them. Um, I I think they are connected along like the neckline and also along the underarm and then along the back.
Yeah.
So it's essentially the same shape as this upper shape of the tank,
Mhm.
except it ends right there with your elastic,
Yeah.
and you would just a lot of those tank tops, if it's the kind that I'm visualizing, is got that fold over elastic essentially that binds the upper edge along the underarm and then kind of turns into the strap. So then you would, make your shelf bra with the elastic at the bottom, and then to attach those layers together, just wrap that fold over elastic around both of the layers, and
Mhm.
then it's attached.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're thinking of the exact same ones too, because I was going to answer that the exact same way. All right. So if you've been watching this and you've been holding on to any questions, we only have a few more minutes left, so don't hold on to them any longer. Go ahead and get those into the chat box. But Aisha says, "What sewing machines do you both have?" So, what do you have?
I have the FOF Passport 2.0, and I was saying earlier that I love it. It's a fantastic machine. It does absolutely everything that I've ever asked it to do. I've sewn through a lot of layers at a time of some thick fabrics, and it's never had any issue. Like I was saying, I love the dual feed foot. I love that it's got 10 buttons, and that's it. For simple me, simple buttons, but it's got the pull out there. You can see all the different decorative stitches. It's got a couple of different buttonholes. It's got the button stitch. You can sew on your buttons with it too. So I love it. I had a couple of brother machines, um, just very simple, basic, kind of their lower end machines when I was in college. And then right as I got out of college, I upgraded to the next up brother, which was always great. But the machines felt a little bit lighter weight to me than this one. And I like that about it. I feel like it's very sturdy. It's well made. So yeah, I'm a fan of Pfaff. I know, Ashley, you've got a ton of different machines we can talk about.
I do. I also started out on Brother machines. Same thing. Very inexpensive, very small, basic machine. I have sewn on Pfaff. I do like those. We have one of those in the studio. We use a lot. Right now, I have the Viking Epic 980Q, and I absolutely love that machine. I was going to try and pivot it around, but it weighs like 30 pounds, so I don't know if I can get it. But you have your 9 buttons. Mine has about, I don't know, a 10 by 15 like touch screen, like it looks like a computer. And like I mean, there's nothing that I like can't do on this machine. If I somehow for some reason like forget how to do something, it plays video tutorials. Like I just search what I want it to do and it plays it for me. I don't have to worry about setting anything. Like I just say that I'm going to stitch on a woven fabric and it senses everything and it just goes. So even if you're like going over different fabrics, it automatically adjusts. It's perfect. So it takes all the guesswork out of anything. So it kind of depends on your style. If you like the more electronic type, or if you like the more, I just want to, sew, nothing fancy. So I feel like there's definitely a machine out there for everybody.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Anna asks, in a dress I already have, I see that they sewed in a 2-inch elastic strip in the middle of the chest to gather the material a bit. Is this the best way to add this detail?
So a 2-inch elastic strip in the middle of the chest. So I'm envisioning a strip going this way.
Yeah, to like ruche it kind of maybe.
Ruching, yeah. Yeah, I think that's 2 inches seems a bit
wide.
It seems wide. It seems like you would only need like a 1/4 inch width of elastic, or maybe she meant the length. Maybe it's 2-inch length.
Oh, that could be.
But yes, that's a good way to get ruching is to put a little strip of elastic, and that'll gather the fabric in, and then you've got that little detail, and then it's it's the gathers to allow fullness for the bust. Mm-hmm. So there are a bunch of different ways to do that. You can go down to the pattern making block and slash and spread and create gathers that way. But yeah, that just adding a little elastic strip to create ruching. It's a good way to even alter a garment if it's got, too much going on. You can add a little elastic strip to kind of gather that in and create a little detail. So yeah, that detail makes sense to me.
Okay, and if you say you bought a shirt and it's just a little bit big in that area and you decide to add that in on your own, how do you do that to secure it at the top and bottom without having to see like the strip of elastic essentially?
Mm-hmm. So you can put that on the wrong side of the shirt, and I would start by pinning the beginning and the end of the elastic, but then say you've got a 2-inch elastic strip, you can put probably 4 inches of fabric on that strip. So you would pin the beginning and the end with 4 inches of fabric kind of puffed there, and then stretch the elastic to match the length of the fabric that you've got behind it, and stitch that. And then when the elastic snaps back, it's going to pull that fabric in with it.
Yep. All right. Absolutely. All right. Our last question here is to repeat the names of our machines. We said them too fast.
Yes. So I have the Pfaff Passport 2.0.
Yep. And I have the Husqvarna Viking Epic 980Q. So fun machines to search if you're looking to upgrade or get new machines. Or of course, we've always mentioned this before, a great way if you're looking to get a new machine, go to a dealer if you can, go to a fabric store that maybe has machines that allows you to try them out, play around and see, if you aren't sure yet, if you're the type of person who likes a super electronic machine versus one that's not, it's a great way to play around and see what your personal preference is. So
yes.
Yeah. Awesome.
And you can kind of get a feel for the manufacturer too by even if, going online to look at what machines they have to offer is great. Test driving is even better. But if you go to a dealer and they don't have the machine the exact machine that you were wanting, you can test drive some others to get a feel for, how that brand works and runs, because a lot of the machines are similar, but they will have different features. So you can get a feel for them and then, order the one that has, exactly the bells and whistles that you want.
Exactly, because it could come down to something super little, and I know we've talked about this sometimes, and even on our sister site, National Quilter Circle, we've talked about it's always the little things that either you love about a machine or that annoy you about a machine that you never would know. Like I had a machine one time that was the noisiest contraption I've ever used, and like that just I didn't want to use it because it was
Right.
so noisy, or like having an issue with having your automatic needle threader never actually threading or something like that. So it's going to be something little that either draws you to the machine or pushes you away from it. So don't think it's not necessary to play around with the machine first. So have some fun with it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here to answer everyone's sewing questions. I want to thank everyone who asked questions, everyone who was watching, and of course, again, if you want some fun free projects to download and play around with, maybe some new projects you haven't done before, click on the banner on the page, and that takes you to where we have a collection of free sewing patterns, all different skill levels, varieties of things to play around with those. And then, of course, join us back here next month where we will answer more of your sewing questions.